So let's look at this 4-point plan. It not only focuses on infrastructure and a drive there, but also the generation of new power, a stimulus package to create jobs, and a drive for industrial growth. We're asking tonight, is it realistic and is it enough, given the ravages of COVID-19 and the lockdown on an economy that was already in a recession? Let's take a quick look at the market reaction. The rand, I can tell you, has weakened, but that was a trend before the announcement. The JSE fell by around 1% today. So definitely no cheers on the market for this recovery plan. Let's discuss now. We're joined by Executive Director of NEDLAC, which brings together business, labour and government, where this plan was discussed. Of course, that is Lisa Seftel, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, Cas Coovadia, and the co-founder of Reimagine South Africa, Dr. Mamphela Ramphele. Thank you all for being with me. Let me start with you, Mr. Coovadia. We know that this plan has been through several iterations. Everybody came to NEDLAC. Business had an idea, Labour had an idea, and government had its own idea. Then there was some coordination. Something coordinated was put on the table, but then it still went to the ANC and Cabinet. I'd like to ask from you, how close is the plan announced today to what was agreed upon and what you were happy with in NEDLAC?
Let me firstly thanks for having me, and let me just clarify a couple of things. The document we agreed at NEDLAC was not an economic recovery plan. It was a document that social partners agreed and identified a number of priority deliverables that can be delivered by government almost immediately. And we agreed at NEDLAC that what we want to give the president is a document that contains these deliverables, and if government implements those deliverables almost immediately, it will actually instill and raise confidence both amongst investors and the public. That was the intention of the NEDLAC process. And that's what we gave to the president. So some of which are in the economic recovery plan he announced earlier today to the joint sitting of Parliament. And amongst those are issuing the RFP for the next tranche of renewables, getting the spectrum going, making the necessary intervention in the Durban port to make that more efficient. Now, these are all issues and areas where government had already taken a decision to do, but implementation has not happened for the last couple of years. And therefore, what businesses' expectation certainly was that government would look at that document, identify those as decisions that have been taken, and actually implement those. Now, the fact that government took that through a particular process, it's now in this economic recovery plan, that's fine. But what we now need is we need social partners to get together urgently to begin to implement, at the very least, some of these short-term priorities. And the levers, certainly in businesses' view, the levers currently lie with government. These are issues that fall squarely in government's domain. And if government pulls those levers now, there will be a positive reaction from the private sector, in that private sector will then be able to actually release resources and invest in some of these. And that's what we need right now. And we don't have time. We got a socio-economic crisis. We've got a fiscal crisis. We're going to have to go out into the market pretty soon to raise money, because we don't have the money in this country to actually do everything we need to do. And we're going to be competing with countries that will also be raising money to rebuild their economies. And we're going to be competing as a country that's currently under a sub-investment grade rating. So we welcome the plan, but we now need urgent and extremely urgent implementation of at least some of the stuff that's in government's domain that doesn't need policy and regulatory consideration and can be implemented tomorrow.
Thank you. And we hear this call over and over again, implementation. Ms. Seftel, I do want to ask you before we look at where this is all going in the future, how useful were those discussions in NEDLAC? For years, critics have said NEDLAC is just a talk shop, bringing people together. Maybe like Mr. Coovadia says, some of the ideas are old, but everybody's agreeing now that they need to be on the agenda, they need to be pushed forward. Was the NEDLAC engagements different this time?
Well, I'm new to NEDLAC, so I can't say if it was different from before. But I think listening to Mr. Coovadia, it is clear that there was something that shifted. And I just want to confirm also, as Dr. Coovadia was saying, Mr. Coovadia, that this is really an action plan. And I think there is something very powerful about having some of the key social partners in our country agreeing and united about it, to be able to, and also united to support and assist government where necessary, and also to take their own action if that is going to make a difference for our economy to recover.
All right, Dr. Ramphele, what do you think? Are these old ideas just repackaged in a new plan? Now, we've had so many plans before, especially because throughout COVID-19, government and some important players have been talking about the opportunity to re-engineer this economy, to reimagine it, to think of the inequality that has been exacerbated by COVID-19 and say, how do we do things differently? Does this plan get anywhere close for you?
Are you asking?
Yes, Dr. Ramphele, yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I believe the plan, as has been said, is adequate to the task. But the issue that has been raised by all commentators is the issue of implementation. And I think what is missing in this conversation is an important element, which is that you cannot have an implementation capacity when you don't have two key elements, a strong state and a strong civil society. And this is a conclusion which was reached by people who did a global comparator of why do some countries succeed and others fail. And it's in a book called The Narrow Corridor, that liberty, which means freedom and its elements, depends on a combination of a strong state and a strong civil society. We know from what's happening at the Zondo Commission that we had a process over the last few years, a decade and some change, a systematic process of weakening the state. At the same time, we have not had, since 1994, a program that promotes strong civil society in the form of responsible, knowledgeable, critical citizens. And I'm bringing this in because if we want to succeed, whether it's this plan or any other plan, however radical, we will not unless there is a shared view of how we are going to implement. And I just give you an example of Scandinavian countries, which were feudal societies in the 1800s. And they could not have become this very prosperous, very peaceful, socially cohesive entities they are today, had they not invested in what they call Bildung, which in our African setup we will call Ubuntu, which is a formation process from childhood to adulthood.
You're raising, Dr. Ramphele.
Scandinavian citizen knows what their rights and responsibilities are. So what I'm saying is that I think our president has put together a good plan, but that plan needs to be implemented by a combination of a strong state and strong civil society.
Well, Dr. Ramphele, the economic crisis is now. This plan and the president and all the commentators are saying we need action in the coming months. So you're talking about a more long-term culture, leadership, maybe investment in education, or is there something that we can do to start building this right now?
I have worked with poor people across the country. It's not a long-term plan. You can start tomorrow. It's about agreeing to a set of values and implementing it in the way we have seen President Ramaphosa starting to implement consequence management. It's not that people don't know what to do, but what we haven't done since 1994 is to put together a management system that translates our constitutional values into day-to-day practice in the public sector, in the private sector as well, because private sector players are also responsible for the problems that we have today. Look at Steinhoff. PIC money went into Steinhoff, 10 billion gone. No accountability. So I'm not talking about things which we'll do in 10 years' time. I'm talking about things we can do tomorrow. And that means that the president tomorrow has to send a strong signal to the Public Service Commission, to all the departments, that is all hands on deck and no corruption, no nepotism, and no fouling of the rules.
All right, and I'm glad you bring up the private sector. Mr. Coovadia, your response to that, and also to what unions, labor unions were saying earlier, that business should come on board, that the big banks for years have been getting rid of jobs. They're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem. Your response to the fact or the claims that the business has been on an investment strike or sitting on the sidelines and in fact has been unpatriotic?
Look, I think we need to understand that business's role is to invest, to grow businesses, to make profits, and from those profits pay tax, and do all of that in an ethical and honorable way. No corporate wants to keep their money in a bank instead of investing and making profits, because it just doesn't make sense. They make much more money for their shareholders and other stakeholders if they invest and make profits. The reason both South African business and global business is not investing in South Africa to the extent that there is the potential opportunity for us to actually attract investment is because we are not creating an environment for investment. We are not creating an environment where we make it easy for businesses to actually start and to grow and to develop. And that's what we need to do. And that's why the levers are with government. So if, for instance, you have an environment that says that we have an Eskom, we know the problems at Eskom. We know that 4 tranches of renewables have worked, and they work very successfully. In fact, amongst best practice in global best practice, the way we've done that. And in all of those renewables, the bulk of the investment has come from the South African financial sector. Why then do we still delay issuing an RFP for the next tranche of renewables? Now, those are the questions we need to ask, because that lies in the hands of government. Why have we delayed up to now sorting out licensing for mining exploration? If we sort out that licensing, immediately private sector funding and investment goes into mining exploration. So it's not an investment strike. It's just the lack of an environment where investment can be made in a way where that investment is safe, where there's policy certainty, there's a single aligned message from government, and where businesses can make profits. That's how businesses work. Businesses aren't social institutions. I agree with Mamphela that business has also been culpable in a lot of the stuff that's happened in the last 10 years or so in South Africa. And we need to have introspection about that. But at the end of the day, businesses are businesses, and that's how they operate. They're not social organizations. But they play a tremendous role if the environment is there for investment, if the environment is there for them to grow businesses and be profitable. Businesses are going to create jobs. Yeah. Jobs aren't going to come out of the sky. Jobs aren't going to be in the long term created by government. And so we've got to begin to have, and the president talks about a compact. And again, I agree with Mamphela that it's not just government's role or businesses' role or labor's role. As a society, we need to get together and we need to unblock the resources in society to actually rebuild our economy. But there are some fundamentals you can't get away from. You need investment, therefore you need to create the environment for investment. Of that investment, we can manage inclusive growth.
All right.
So that we get growth going. Once we get growth going, businesses are profitable, they start paying taxes, we manage government expenditure, and that then begins to help us address our fiscal crisis.
All right.
This isn't rocket science. This is the way things work. Now, whether we like it or not, this is the way things work. And the bottom line is that because of everything that's happened in the last 10, 12 years, those levers to create that environment lie with government. And that's what we have been asking government to do for the last 3 years.
All right, and thank you for that. I'd like to look at some of the things that weren't in the plan today, maybe where the money will come from, how this is going to be costed, many asking for strict timelines, and perhaps the elephant in the room here, possibly the wage bill. So Ms. Seftel, this will be directed to you. We have this outstanding issue. The midterm budget will be delayed, perhaps because of it. Will government dig in its heels and say we're not going to give government workers an increase that they want? Or will it give government workers the increase and then, there's less money to go around for all these other priorities? Does NEDLAC play an important role, or has NEDLAC done its work now, or will it continue to be a place where these parties with very differing views of how we deal with the economy come together and talk about these things? What do you see the role of NEDLAC going forward?
Yeah. So the issue of wages in the public sector has not, and the particular wage negotiations was not conducted in and through NEDLAC, because NEDLAC is really a social compacting, social dialogue organization. Those negotiations happened within the Public Sector Bargaining Council, and as you know, there's still a dispute there. However, the issue of South Africa's fiscal framework and how the budget should look and how it should prioritize is something that the NEDLAC social partners have been seized with, and government does consult about it. In fact, both before the budget and for the medium-term budget policy statements, there is engagement between the social partners and NEDLAC. Is there an agreement reached about it? No, because I think on something like this, the executive has the authority and ultimately is accountable for taxpayers' money.
Yeah, and this is an issue that's been outstanding for a while. Dr. Ramphele, let me perhaps end with you. We'll see if we can throw in one more question afterwards. But there was a great idea put forward today about women-owned businesses, and the President said this could in fact be linked to gender-based violence, not only supporting local small businesses, but supporting local small businesses run by women. It's a big question there where the government is going to put its money where its mouth is and support these businesses as well. But do you think this, along with support for township economies, the words that were used, does it instill great confidence?
I think it's a great idea provided and I'm going back to that question of the combination of a strong state and strong civil society. The problem is not with women or their ability or otherwise of doing business. The problem is a culture within our society that undermines the ability of all people to make the contributions they should make. We have a patriarchal system very strongly entrenched in both government and the private sector that undervalues the contribution that women make. It's unfortunate because, as Cas was saying, if business wants to have a profitable, prosperous environment in which it works, it's got to jettison patriarchy, which it is a very strong, which is a very strong culture in corporate South Africa and in our public sector. Women are the majority in this country. So if you want to grow the economy of this country, you've got to have an inclusion of all the people who will bring their creativity, their energy. But women, we also know, bring to business, to social engagement, a long-term view, an inclusive view. Just look at the countries that are run by women that have opted for not measuring their progress by GDP growth, but by well-being of all people and of the planet. They are doing better. They did better in terms of COVID. They've got fewer infections, fewer deaths, and they're building back quicker. And they're able to get what Lisa is struggling with at NEDLAC, because you've got bulls that are all fighting for a space to roar in a woman in a circle of conversations. It's about what is in the best thing for my children and my grandchildren. And this is not to say that all women are good and all men are bad. No, it is to say a society that creates space for both men and women to bring the best out of themselves to contribute to the future are much better off. And going back to the Scandinavian countries I started with, in Scandinavia, you have men taking paternity leave and women taking maternity leave because the society has, from its feudal roots, come to realize that the strength of gender equality is equal to none. And that is why I'm very grateful to the president, and I want to encourage him, but we are going to hold him accountable to follow through on this commitment that he has made.
All right. We're about to end, but let me give you the final word, Dr. Coovadia. We're talking about women-owned businesses. You were talking about the general environment that invites businesses to invest earlier. And I'd like to know that this infrastructure plan, certainly it still has to be costed. Government has to pay for the infrastructure unless you get private partners on board, but they take the profits in future. How do you see it working? And when you hear infrastructure drive and the president encouraging South Africans to buy locally, to export more to the rest of the continent, does it make you think this is a potential business boom, or are you still sitting there quite skeptical?
Look, I think the point we've continuously made about infrastructure is the president talked about, if I remember correctly, about 235 catalytic infrastructure projects. We can't deal with 235 infrastructure projects. What we've got to do is we've got to identify the 4, 5, 6 critical infrastructure projects that's going to make a significant impact on the socio-economy of this country. We've got to identify those that have some sort of an income stream, and those can be actually funded if they're properly managed. And the renewables is a good example of that. If they're properly managed, if there's certainty of the rules and so on, the private sector will come to the party to actually fund those. those that do not have an income stream and are social infrastructure projects. That's government's domain, but government can utilize private sector capacity and resources to even bring those onto stream. So we've got to identify the 5 or 6 top infrastructure projects, most critical ones, structure them, bring them to market, let private sector bid for it, and they'll do it. They do this in other parts of the continent.
All right.
They do this all over the world. They don't do it here, and we need to ask why. So that's the one thing. The other thing is we've got to look at, as I said earlier, that this isn't government's role or private sector's role alone. We've got to work together. And government, we've got to start accepting each other's bona fides. We need to get beyond this trust deficit, and we've got to bring to bear the best resources available in the country, irrespective of where they sit. So government shouldn't be reluctant to accept capacity, be it in the labor movement, be it in the private sector, be it in civil society. Take that capacity so that we can implement what we need to implement. We can manage that, we can structure that so that we don't want the state to be captured again. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But we certainly promoting that we don't have the luxury of engineers sitting at home because they've retired and doing nothing when they're willing to come back and put their shoulders to the wheel. We've got to utilize all of that. We've got to see this as a national effort where we begin to trust each other, we bring all that capacity to bear, and we move forward together. Because
Mr. Coovadia,
I've been saying quite often, and my wife will be very disappointed if I don't say this in an interview.
Very quickly, please.
I've been saying quite often that we are at a T-junction. We take the wrong turn and we're going towards a failed state. We take the correct turn, and as a country, we go on to the first rung of a long ladder that's going to be tough road to economic growth.
All right,
but
we have to end it there. I'm so sorry, Mr. Coovadia. I could ask you all 10 more questions, but we've run out of time, and I think a good note to end on. That was Executive Director of NEDLAC, Lisa Seftel, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, Cas Coovadia, and the co-founder of Reimagine South Africa, Dr. Mamphela Ramphele.